Happy New Year. Welcome to 2025. Look, if you've got health goals, if you're frustrated with the amount of medicine you're on, if you're frustrated with your doctor, if you're just looking for answers to autoimmunity, looking for answers to chronic inflammation and pain, and you're mega frustrated, this is the right show for you to tune into. We're going to be doing a deep dive into the no grain, no pain protocol. If you're not familiar with my book, you will become so. We're going to be talking about how to change your diet, how to change your lifestyle to maximize your health and take control of your health. So this is definitely a show you don't want to miss if your goal is a healthy 2025. We'll be right back. You unlock this door with the key of compassion. Beyond it is another world, a world of science, a world of common sense, a world of sanity. You're moving into a land of both empathy and ethics, of nutritional knowledge and empowerment. You've just crossed over into Dr. Osborne's zone. Welcome back. Today we're diving into no grain, no pain. Before I do, I think it's very important that you understand the origin story of how this came to be. See, when I was a young intern working in the VA hospital in the rheumatology department, I met with so much frustration. We would have chronic sick patients coming in, diseases like lupus and rheumatoid arthritis and ankylosing spondylitis and psoriatic arthritis, scleroderma, you name it. If it was a painful autoimmune condition, we saw it. And the biggest frustration that I had working in the hospital system was the lack of approach to try to figure out why these people were sick. I mean, these were veterans, served their country, on multiple medications. The only solution was to suppress the immune system or to suppress their pain. But nobody was really asking, why are these people sick? And that's where my story begins, because that was the first question that I had when I was doing this internship. And I kept coming back to my attending doc and asking, can we do diet change? Can we do lifestyle change? There's a lot of great research on gluten sensitivity and rheumatoid arthritis. There's really good studies showing that fasting, not eating for 48 hours, can actually lead to dramatic reductions in pain. There's fantastic research showing that more omega-3 in the diet can actually work as effectively as certain pain medications. And I was repetitively shot down and told, no, we're not going to do that. So one of the first things that happened to me when I left the VA hospital was a mother brought her young 9-year-old daughter in to see me. Her name was Ginger. For those of you who have read my book, maybe you're familiar with this story, but Ginger was given a terminal diagnosis. They gave her 6 months to live. And she was diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. She had a permanent port embedded in her arm because she was in and out of the hospital so frequently for pain management. And one day, the doctor looks at Ginger's mother and says, you need to go home and prepare for your daughter's demise, basically. Imagine being a parent and hearing that message from a doctor you've trusted for 7 years. You've trusted that doctor to treat your daughter, to take care of her, and now all of a sudden the drugs aren't working to manage the pain and we don't know what else to do, and so go home and die? Well, that's what Ginger's mom was told. And so when she brought her to me, I was a young, very green doctor. This was well over 20 years ago. And she brought her to me out of desperation, as you could imagine. I wasn't the first choice of doctors. I was the last choice. And as we tested Ginger, everything I learned in the VA hospital as far as what triggers or what can trigger autoimmune disease that was being ignored by the doctors there, I started to apply in my own practice. And so Ginger, we tested her. She was gluten sensitive. She was allergic to blueberries, of all things. Now, her mom would give her a blueberry smoothie every morning as a superfood to help her with her arthritis. So you can imagine, obviously it wasn't working. Once we determined what she was reactive to and we changed her diet, within 6 months she had the port removed. So she was no longer in and out of the hospital, and she certainly wasn't dead. They'd given her 6 months to live. So at this point, we now have the port out of the arm, and in another 6 months, We have her off of medication, and she's in a remissive state, symptom-free, pain-free, walking like the other kids, smiling like the other kids, as 9-year-olds should do. And so that was my first major experience in altering, saving somebody's life in clinical practice as a result of changing diet. And that's where No Grain, No Pain comes from. The last several decades of my life have been dedicated to helping people understand that autoimmune disease has triggers. Those triggers are food, chemicals, microbes, and nutritional deficiencies. And that's why those are the things I preach day in and day out for people who are struggling to find real answers. So again, tonight we're going to dive into the No Grain, No Pain protocol. If you're not familiar with my book, it's available at most major book retailers. You can get it at Amazon. It's published in 5 different languages internationally. And so highly recommend you use the book as a tutor over the next 30 days if you're joining us during the challenge. But I'm going to be covering a lot of those bases within the book in this video. So let's dive in to No Grain, No Pain. So we break it down into 2 dietary segments. Day 1 to 15 is segment number 1. And the general rule of the first 2 weeks, as far as diet strategy is concerned, is to eat whole organic food. We're not eating processed food or packaged food. We're eating real food in those first 15 days. Now, here's a litmus test for you. So if we're doing our own kind of screening as you're in the grocery store, is it No Grain, No Pain approved, or is it not? Rule number 1, try to make it organic. I know not 100% of foods are available 100% of the time organically, but do your best here. Meats should be grass-fed, grass-finished. Fish should be wild-caught. Eggs should be free-range organic. Produce, ideally organic. So these are some general rules. Now, we want to try to avoid processed or packaged foods. And if you flip over the label, even of a package, maybe it's a whole food inside, you want to look at this right here, the nutrition facts panel, and below that, you'll generally see this. It says ingredients. And then it will list all the things in that food in order of from greatest to least, the greatest quantity to least. If these terms in the ingredient list, if you can't pronounce them, don't buy it. You can't pronounce them, it's probably not good for you. As a general rule, those are what you want to try to stick to. So again, whole organic foods, grass-fed, grass-finished. Avoid packaged processed foods with long chemical terms you don't understand. Now, as far as the general rules, day 1 to 15, these are foods that we're going to eliminate in the first 2 weeks. So we're eliminating all grains. Now, some of you may say, well, what about corn? What about rice? What about buckwheat, amaranth, and quinoa? No, we're avoiding all grains. We're avoiding all pseudo-grains. That's buckwheat, amaranth, and quinoa. And we're avoiding all foods that contain grains. So if it's in there, for example, many of you try to restore your health with supplements. You try to support restoring your health with supplements. And a lot of the supplements will contain corn fiber, corn sugar-based ingredients. A lot of times you'll see rice powder in supplements. We don't want these things. These are grains. We want them out. This is a grain-free diet. All grains are out. If you go to the gluten-free aisle and you're looking at different pastas and cereals and breads, if those pastas, cereals, and breads are labeled gluten-free but contain oats or contain corn or rice, you're going to put them back on the shelf. This is a grain-free diet, not simply a gluten-free diet. Remember, it's no grain, no pain, not no gluten, no pain. Now we're going to eat meat, but we're going to eliminate meat from grain and soy-fed beef and other animals. So if you're looking to buy some pork and you're not sure what that pork was fed, then we're going to be avoiding pork during this time. Now, if you can get good, like here in my local area, we have some great pork farmers. You can get grazed pork. But you're looking for, again, avoidance of these animals that have been largely grain and soy fed as their staple foods. This feeding of grain and soy to ruminant animals increases inflammation in the animals. It increases the type of fat, the omega-6 fat in the meat of those animals. Omega-6 is one of the core fundamental drivers of excessive pain and inflammation. And so we're trying to control that through diet change. So we're avoiding the meats that are not grass-fed, free-range, organic. We're avoiding all farm-raised fish and shellfish. So if you know the key delineating term here is wild caught, you're looking for wild caught. We're also avoiding all dairy products, including fermented dairy products like yogurt and kefir, as well as dairy derivatives. So dairy's out. And one of the biggest reasons why dairy's out is it's a mimicker of gluten. It can actually, if you haven't seen some of my shows about dairy, where I go into the depth and the science and the research on this, I highly encourage you to check those out. But we're avoiding dairy during this day 1 to 15. Now we're also avoiding all processed and GMO foods, including so-called gluten-free products and any other artificial ingredients. All soy products, including fermented soy products such as soy sauce, tofu. We're avoiding miso as well. We're avoiding all manufactured sugars, and we're avoiding all artificial sweeteners. So Diet Coke or any other diet soft drink is out. Manufactured sugar, sugar cane, even if it's organic, we're avoiding sugar, processed sugar, in day 1 through 15. It's very important to follow the rules. Breaking them could make or break your success. Now let's talk a little bit about why. Why are we implementing these strategies? This is the grainflammation cycle. So it's the cycle that I use to describe how grains cause inflammation. And if you look here on this side of the equation, you'll see a number of different things that are found within grain that can drive inflammation. So what most people are familiar with is gluten. Like that's the primary thing that most people are trying to do. They're trying to go on a gluten-free diet. But again, strictly a gluten-free, wheat, barley, rye-free diet will not work. You'll have persistent inflammation, persistent problems. So gluten is just one aspect. We have one of the other aspects is GMO and pesticides, right? And this is especially true foods that are Roundup ready or glyphosate ready. Glyphosate is a known mineral chelator, and so it can actually deplete mineral absorption, causing you to become malnourished. Beyond that, it can disrupt the microbiome. That's your natural bacteria in your GI tract. So in essence, it's an antibiotic. We know now a number of trials have gone, jury trials have convicted this company that makes this product of contributing to cancer deaths in individuals, or basically they have found glyphosate responsible for contributing to or causing cancer. So we want it out of your diet, right? You don't want to eat things that can potentially cause cancer. But it's not just glyphosate in the pesticide category. Grains are also treated with pesticides like atrazine. So you've got to be careful there. There are other contaminants in grain. Mold. Mold and mycotoxins are probably some of the biggest issues with grain as a staple food in the human diet. And it has to do with the way that the grains are farmed. They're stored in these big bins where they're exposed to the potential for mold to begin growing on them, and then mycotoxins from the mold start to be produced, and then that stuff contaminates the food supply, and now you're eating it. And these guys, mycotoxins, will cause inflammation. They're nerve toxins. They've been proven to cause nerve damage. They can also cause microbiome disruption, much like the pesticides can, and then mycotoxins are also known to contribute to chronic fatigue, chronic pain, as well as nerve inflammation. So we don't want these things. Excessive omega-6. Remember I said earlier, don't eat cows or meats that are predominantly grain or soy fed because of the omega-6 abundance in the meat. Well, if you're eating predominantly grain, this is the biggest source of omega-6 in the human diet, is overloading on grain. So we want to avoid that, because omega-6, when the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio in the average adult in the United States, this ratio is somewhere 16 plus. Which, what does that mean? That ratio, when your omega-6 is that high and your omega-3 is that low, and you have that ratio of 16 or higher, it increases the inflammation response. What do we want that ratio to be? We want in our diet 4 or less. And the only way you're not going to do that, eating grain is the staple food in your diet. So the excessive omega-3 drives the inflammatory cascade. We know that grains contain excessive carbohydrates. Right now, we're standing at 60 to 70% of people in our country are obese and insulin resistant. You can't dig out of that hole if you're eating abundance of carbohydrate in your diet. We know that gluten can cause, and grains can cause, leaky gut, intestinal permeability. Basically, your gut develops microscopic pinholes, and now your poop leaks into your bloodstream, leading to systemic exposure to your immune system of things that don't belong, endotoxins, bacterial toxins, and other elements from the GI tract that, again, don't belong in your bloodstream. We know that many grains are contaminated with heavy metal. This is especially true of grains like rice that can contain lead and cadmium. But we know, for example, corn syrup contains mercury. So a lot of problems. If you look at the recalls in the food industry, there's been a lot of recalls of baby food cereals because of heavy metal contamination. We also know that ATIs, this is an acronym for amylase trypsin inhibitors. These are protein compounds. This is one type of protein compound, along with, there are other groups, we call them plant-century proteins, that can activate TLR4 receptors, leading to increases in inflammation. And this is a mechanism that's very distinct and different from gluten's mechanism of driving inflammation. So these plant-century proteins like ATIs can all drive, keyword here, inflammation. Now, if we look at, the side effect of inflammation for most people is pain. Now, pain can manifest in a lot of different ways: joint pain, muscle pain, neurological pain, but pain can also manifest with dysfunction, a dysfunctional thyroid, dysfunctional skin barrier. And so you might have the pain of brain fog, or the pain of a skin rash, or the pain of something else where your body is breaking down. Ultimately, when you have pain, you get a medicine. That's what happens when you go to the doctor. Many of these medications that are given are anti-inflammatories, right? Because we're talking about inflammation. Well, what's the predominant anti-inflammatory prescribed? Steroids. There's also non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, and some of you may self-medicate. Tylenol, ibuprofen, and other similar NSAID type. Tylenol is not an NSAID, but ibuprofen is, and there are a number of others like Mobic and naproxen, etc. So we have a predominance of pop that pill to lower the inflammation. So this is one mechanism that people are attracted to as a general rule of thumb. But when we're inflamed, one of the things that happens is we get an increased cortisol response. And increased cortisol degrades your muscle. So it leads to muscle loss, which subsequently can lead to weight gain. When you lose muscle, your metabolism slows down. That weight gain and muscle loss can lead to joint pain and joint compression, which then just feed the cycle. And so now you're medicating a problem of inflammation, but not addressing the core of the inflammation, which are these things here. And now the medication doesn't come without side effects. These medicines damage the gut. And once the gut becomes damaged, you start becoming reactive to more and more foods. Basically, the way you treat the inflammation from this food group is to take drugs that damage the intestine, causing you to become more allergic and more sensitive to more food groups. And so now the very act of eating becomes the act of self-poisoning slowly over time, driving inflammation. That's why it's the grainflammation cycle. Grain is what kicks this whole thing off. And so many people that come to see me, even after taking gluten out, they don't take all these other things out, they'll take the gluten out, continue to struggle because they're not addressing the core of these other elements that are also found within grains. Now, a perfect example of this scenario was a woman that came to see me. This is a number of years ago. Her name is Shannon. Shannon came to me. She had multiple autoimmune inflammatory diagnoses given to her by her primary doctors, and she was at a loss because she was on multiple medications and she was not getting better. She was digressing into a much worse state. I'm going to share her story with you, so check out Shannon's story and we'll be right back.
I had a journey of doctor visits trying to determine why I had eczema and digestive issues. And the doctors only had a solution of prescribing me steroids or cortisone cream, antidepressants, and allergy shots, of which I stayed on starting at my childhood throughout my adult life. And at the age of 50, I developed an autoimmune condition called polymyalgia that practically crippled me and was extremely painful. The eczema was the hardest to live with. It started early in my childhood, and I didn't know what caused the itching, and we tried to determine, was it food, was it environmental, was it a makeup that I would use? I became scared of living and became very anxious. I knew that it wasn't good to be on medications as much as I was, or my daughter was. And I knew they were harming me, but the doctors, there was no other answer. And the rheumatologist had assured me that if I was off of my prednisone, I would stiffen back up and be crippled. So there was no other solution. She felt that I needed to be on that for the rest of my life. And then that's when I found Dr. Osborne, who felt differently. When I came to him, the prednisone was working, but before that, I was practically crippled. I couldn't even lift my arms over my head or turn a steering wheel in the car, barely walk up the stairs. And it was an extreme pain. And the prednisone, the miracle drug that it is, masked everything, and then I could go on living. But it was doing a lot of harm, which Dr. Osborne was able to reveal to me, and we were able to put a stop to it then. We had just been shunned and pushed out of the doctor's offices. They sometimes never even looked at you in your eye, and you might have spent 20 minutes with them, and they filled out a prescription and sent you out the door with a good luck wish. Dr. Osborne looked at my daughter and myself in our eyes and said, "I'll dig as deep as I have to dig to find out what's wrong with you." He spends time, he cares deeply for each person, and he never stops caring. After 3 years, I'm free of pain. I can run. I'm not stiff. In the mornings when I get up, I can run if I want to. I can jump on a trampoline if I want to. I'm free of eczema. I'm no longer on prednisone or cortisone creams. At the age of 60, feel better than I've ever felt in my entire life.
Wow, what a powerful testimony to diet change. I'm sure many of you could probably relate to what Shannon was going through. That being said, let's dive in to days 15 through 30. So we've talked about the first 2 weeks. Now let's dive into the second 2 weeks. Now, we give you a little bit of a break in those first 2 weeks, but we eliminate a few more things in that second phase of the diet, what we call phase 2. And so one of the things that we eliminate are vegetables in the nightshade family. Why? Because these vegetables, like potatoes and eggplant and peppers, etc., contain compounds such as solenoids and other compounds that drive inflammation. So for many people, and this is based on decades of experience seeing which foods people react to, many people react to this family in a big way, and so we cut this group out to get further reductions in inflammation. Now we also cut out legumes, including peanuts. So legumes are beans, also lentils, and peanuts, oftentimes referred to as a nut, are technically a legume. So we cut this family out as well because it can become extremely problematic in driving up omega-6 or maintaining those really high omega-6 levels. But also why? Because beans and lentils particularly are tremendous pressure on the digestive tract. And so a lot of times when a person's going gluten-free, grain-free, they've suffered with years of intestinal damage as a result of the gluten and grain components damaging the intestine, and then the medicines also damaging the intestine. And so these people have reduced or poor digestion. And one of the problems with beans, legumes, is that they are hard to digest. And so if you're trying to use these as staple foods in this section of the diet, it's going to hinder your nutrition. It's going to hinder your ability to digest and absorb effectively. It's going to put undue pressure and stress on your GI tract, which is already leaking. So we're trying to remember the name of the game here in the second phase is to take more stress off of the gut, but also to reduce other elements of inflammation. We also look at avoiding certain nuts and seeds. What's allowed, flax and chia are allowed, but the others we take out. As far as seeds are concerned. As far as nuts, almonds are allowed. Pistachios are allowed. Walnuts are allowed. Your basic tree nuts are allowed. Cashews are the main one that we avoid. Even though technically cashews are a seed, but most people consider cashew to be a nut, so those ones are out. We avoid processed sugar. We continue to keep that processed sugar out. We avoid all forms of artificial sweeteners. That includes, the pink, the yellow, and the blue packets of stuff that you get at the restaurants that contain sucralose and saccharin and sulfame and others. And then we also, obviously, we want to avoid smoking. As a matter of fact, a lot of people don't realize this, but tobacco is a nightshade. And this is one of the reasons why so many people that repetitively smoke have so much joint pain and joint problems. They're actually smoking a nightshade, and it's creating a problem for them. At this point, too, we're also going to be avoiding coffee and black tea and other forms of caffeine. Caffeine is a gastric irritant. If your GI tract's already damaged, again, we're trying to take that pressure away from the GI tract so that it can heal and repair, so that the gut can seal. And the other thing we're trying to do by eliminating and reducing caffeine is to take pressure off the adrenal glands. If we go back to what I was talking about earlier with the cortisol response, the adrenal glands are responsible for producing that cortisol. And a lot of people have been so inflamed for so long, the adrenal glands, they're not up to par. They're not functioning at full capacity, and they're really struggling. And so if you're using a lot of caffeine for your energy, you're putting more pressure on these glands that are already struggling, and it's going to slow down your progress. It's also, again, a gastric irritant. Caffeine's a diuretic, and which is going to cause loss of water-soluble vitamins. So you're going to have a reduction in mineral and vitamin absorption through the kidneys, and potentially even low-grade dehydration as you're over-consuming. I actually had an interesting story. I had a patient one time. She came in, and she was a diabetic with blood sugars over 300, wasn't controlling her sugar at all. When I asked her what she was doing, one of the things she would do every morning was drink a pot of coffee. Of course, she didn't call it a pot of coffee. She called it a cup of coffee. She said, I only have 1 cup a day. But she was refilling one of those large 70-ounce stop-and-go refillable mugs every morning. And so that was wrecking her ability to absorb nutrition, and it was dehydrating her, and it was making her blood sugar problem worse. So again, caffeine we keep out of the second phase of the no-grain, no-pain diet. You shouldn't need caffeine for energy anyway. And And so we're going to remove that irritant. Now, beyond the diet change, there's some other rules that we want to adhere to during the No Grain, No Pain Challenge. And one of them is sleep. Now, many of you may struggle to fall asleep because you're in pain. Pain is what's keeping you from having a good night's sleep. And if that's the case, I want you to watch my sleep show. We did an entire crash course on how to navigate sleep and get better sleep. But we need sleep. The time frame, you should shoot for a 9 p.m., especially in the winter, 9 p.m. bedtime. Generally, the sun sets in the winter around 9 o'clock, or rather around 6 o'clock. And so that gives you 3 hours beyond sunset. Ideally, you would be going down with sunset, but 9 p.m. bedtime, our goal is to be asleep between the hours of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. as a minimum. Now, you certainly want to sleep longer than 10 to 2, but as a bare minimum, this is the time frame your body heals. This is when your body resets. This is when your hormones reset, your circadian rhythm resets, and this is the most valuable 4-hour block or 4-hour window of sleep. If you get 4 hours of sleep on the tail end of that, in other words, if you're going to bed at midnight or 2, you don't make it up. Your sleep quality isn't going to be the same as if you fall within that time frame. This is a time frame that's been pretty well researched in terms of overall health and inflammation. And so we know this because of shift workers who fall outside of this time frame. And if you are a shift worker, you need to look at things like blackout curtains so that you can try your best to emulate sun up and sun down. You should be investing in light therapy as well if you're a shift worker. There's a whole set of strategies behind shift work we can get into at a later date, but sleep quality has got to be there. So your bedtime, you're aiming for 9 p.m., get in bed, being asleep by 10, and being asleep at least until 2, preferably you're sleeping much longer. 7 to 9 hours is roughly what most people need. And, some people more. If you're chronically sick and really trying to recover, 12 hours of sleep is not unheard of as far as need. And a lot of people, especially in the United States, think that sleeping that long is lazy, and then they have feelings of guilt and stress builds internally because they think they're not doing enough with their time. But keep in mind that if you're tired and your body's telling you to sleep more, you should listen to it. So, especially this is true of women. Men can generally, not that they're getting away with it, men can physically get away with it, although it still deteriorates their health in other ways. They can physically get away with it better than women, but nobody's really getting away with a lack of sleep. So you really want great sleep quality, 10 to 2, preferably longer on the other side, but 7 to 12 hours generally is a good time frame to aim for depending on the current state of your health. Okay, let's look at exercise. This is very, very important that you put a star right here by this term. Exercise to tolerance. We're not trying in this No Grain, No Pain Challenge, we're not trying to make everybody go to CrossFit and beat themselves up if you've not done that, if you're not physically fit. What we want is for you to start moving your body in a consistent, regular way. And so some of you, this may just be a 30-minute walk. For some of you, this may be more than that. It may be some calisthenics at home. Maybe you're not ready to go lift heavy weights, but maybe some push-ups and sit-ups and lunges, jump ropes, just some body weight motion or movement is all you can tolerate. So maybe some of you, all you can really do is some light stretching. If the point is, meet your body where it's at. Don't force exercise for fear of lack of response in the program. Exercise is important. Do it to tolerance and build. This is something that builds as you do more. So as you do more, you should be able to do more. So start with something light. Err on the side of caution, progressively get heavier, get longer to a point, right? If we really look at the 3 components of exercise, there's kind of a trifecta or a triangle of exercise that you can consider, but think of it like this. There's flexibility, there's strength, and there's cardio. And ideally, you're incorporating a little bit of all of these things on a regular basis, but some of you at this point may not be able to incorporate the strength to the level that you would like to. And so you may just start with some light stretching and some walking, walking not being tremendously cardiovascular, but still good. It's still a good place to start. And so again, it's always tolerance. Don't beat yourself up if you're not a physical athlete or in tremendous shape. Start with something, progressively build up as you get better, as it gets easier, do more. Clean air. This is a big one. This is one that a lot of you are ignoring. Look, we live in cities. We live in tight houses that have very little external fresh air coming into them, or have tremendous amounts of outgassing of chemicals, things like VOCs, volatile organic compounds, that are emitted from paints, new carpets, furniture, artificial tiles and flooring, new clothing, new shower curtains. You bring stuff into the house that's been bathed in chemicals, and those chemicals permeate into your air. And if you're not filtering your air, this is something you should put on your 2025 list of things to prioritize. If you're breathing poisonous air on a regular basis, it's going to be very, very hard for your body to heal and repair and recover, right? So a lot of you also suffer from allergens. And so there are a number of different things that can float around and move around in your air. There's, bacteria, there's viruses, there's molds that can stimulate the immune system. And if you're struggling with autoimmunity, your immune system's already being overwhelmed. And so because it's being overwhelmed, people generally become more susceptible to the particulate in the air. And so we want to do our best to keep that clean and filter it out. And the best type of filter, the best technology that we have to date is predominantly something called HEPA. So if you have a good, solid HEPA filter, you're doing a good job. Just make sure that it runs long enough, and make sure that it's rated. If it's a standalone plug-in filter, make sure it's rated for the amount of square footage. If that's beyond your budget and you're trying to do this on a budget, then I would recommend that you get a HEPA filter. If your house is bigger than what your filter can remove from the air, then plug this thing in your bedroom right by your bed, so that you, at the very least, when you're trying to get that good night's sleep, you're breathing in a cleaner quality air. And I'll put some links below in the show notes for some of my favorite air filters and water filters, which is what we're going to talk about next, which is water, drinking clean water. In my town, in my hometown of Houston, at the last check, there were 42 prescription drugs found in the drinking water after the city had filtered it. This is after the city's done with it, right? So if you're in a major metropolitan area, you have to understand that the average 40-year-old or older is on 4+ medications. And some of these medications get thrown away. They get tossed in the toilet. Some of these medications get peed in the toilet. In essence, people are urinating out, metabolized versions of these medicines that end up in our drinking water. It's such a problem in most major cities that pharmacies have implemented recalls on medications where if you're not using it or you don't finish it, they're asking you not to throw it away. They're asking you not to flush it down the toilet. They're asking you to bring it back in, because this stuff is landing in our water supply and it's contaminating it. So if you're not filtering your water, in my opinion, that's probably the lowest hanging fruit of things that you should be focused on. Now, the other thing we see in the water that's problematic is chlorine, and sometimes chloramines, depending on where you live, but also fluoride. Now, I don't know if you saw here just recently, the government admitted that they've been over-fluoridating the water, and so for the first time, the recommendation was to actually lower the fluoride content of the water. Neurotoxin, fluoride, and it will displace, it's a halide, fluoride is, and so it will displace iodine from your thyroid. Fluoride pushes iodine out of the thyroid. It competes for absorption. So if you're being over-fluoridated, it can affect your thyroid gland and how well your metabolism works. Same thing is true of chlorine. Chlorine's a halide that can displace iodine from the thyroid as well. So the drinking water contains 2 of the 4 halides that that exist, right? So chlorine, fluoride, the other one's bromine, and then iodine is the 4th. We want the iodine, we don't want the other 3, and so if you're not filtering your water, you're most likely getting these. Now, we're also seeing pesticides show up in drinking water. One of the things the cities are doing now to save money is they're using groundwater, which is the surface water, and they're just cleaning it repetitively. And so that groundwater, which is the stuff on the top that holds the most pollution, is overtaxing what the city's filtering systems are capable of actually removing. And so by going to groundwater, which is cheaper for the cities, is actually less healthy for you. So what should you have in place in terms of filtration? Ideally, if you're in the city, you want an RO filter, reverse osmosis. Reverse osmosis is the most effective. The carbon filters, the Brita pitchers, those types of things, they do not remove fluoride. They don't pull fluoride out of the water, and some of those are so cheap they barely remove the chlorine. And pesticides is a whole nother matter. So you really want a high quality filter. Reverse osmosis filters, generally they're the kinds that they come in the big tank, and then they have a pre-carbon filter. They usually connect them under your sink. You can buy reverse osmosis countertop units as well that will filter. You just put your water in it and it filters your water through an electrical RO unit that sits on the countertop. But RO is what I would suggest if you live in the city. So if you're in the city, RO. Now if you have a well and you've had your well water tested for contaminants and it's naturally safe, then a good solid carbon and KDF filter will work to keep it pretty clean. You got to remember too, if your well's 100 plus feet deep, the earth has been filtering that water. It's an underwater river for all intents and purposes that has been filtered through hundreds of feet potentially of earth. And so you can also use carbon KDF on the well water as an extra step. But again, RO filters, carbon or KDF filters if you're on a well, but filter your water because there's definitely the potential for chemicals in it. Microplastics are now showing up in the water. We've got all kinds of stuff showing up. Every time you look at a new news story, there's more garbage in the water. Okay, next thing we need to focus on during this 30-day challenge is to spend some time outside. And the general rule of thumb here is we want 20 or plus. We want 20 plus minutes. Ideally, when should that be? If you're only going out once, ideally should be between 9 and 11 a.m. to get that sun, that ultraviolet, as well as that red light exposure in the morning to set your circadian rhythm up for success. Now, I know the weather in the winter months can be a little challenging and a little bit difficult, but even if you bundle up, you're still going to get the benefit of the sunlight on your eyes. You're still going to get the benefit of the red lights penetrating through your clothing and through your skin. And so those benefits are tremendous. But when you spend time outside, not only do you get the rays of the sun, and if you haven't watched my show on the power of sunlight as medicine, it's the most powerful medicine you could ever take is sun. And I would argue that among any other kind of medicine, sunlight deficiency is one of the biggest epidemic problems in modern culture. So we want sun exposure. Now in the winter months, I go so far as to use UV lamps and infrared lamps, simply because I can't always get outside because of the weather, or if it's raining or if it's abysmally cold. Many of you in the country live right now, there's a major Arctic freeze going on, and so having access to lamps may be something you want to put on your 2025 radar as a goal, especially those of you that live super far north. The further above 27 degrees latitude you live, the greater the potential for problems from lack of sunshine. That's why we see people using, UV lamps, red lamps. We also see them using what are called SAD lights, SAD, seasonal affective disorder. These are light boxes that usually they illuminate 10,000, what are called lux, L-U-X. That's just the power of 10,000 candles is what lux is. It's an illumination, and so that's the way these boxes are scored. So you can have a lux light or a sad light. You can have a UV light that's different than a sad light. You can have a red light that's different than the other two. But I would encourage you to look more into it. Watch my show on sunlight as medicine and light as medicine to learn more about it. Because beyond that, we make vitamin D in the sun. We make melatonin in the sun. Our ATP production goes up when we get sun. Sunlight acts as a battery to charge humans. This is why you can get people that do multi-week fasts and they still have energy even though they're not eating food. There's an aspect to the sun providing energy through the enhancement of ATP production in your cells. And you get that when you go outside, you don't when you stay inside. And the other aspect of going outside is fresh air. Fresh, clean air. There are natural, we'll use the term chemicals in nature, aromas, if you will, essential oils. The whole essential oil industry is based on the stuff that you get for free when you walk outside and you smell the pine cones and the pine, or you smell the cedar or whatever it might be. You get this for free. The research coming out of Japan, they call this forest bathing. And what they're finding is it has tremendous impact on human health. Going outside, being in nature, on stress levels, on cortisol levels, on circadian rhythm. So spend time outside. We live in such a technology-dependent culture that people have forgotten where they came from, and so they're avoiding outside, and you should be spending more time. And I say 20 plus minutes because don't stop at 20 if you have time in your day to spend more. If I could spend hours of my day outside every day, I would, and some days I do. So get outside, very important. Okay, next rule here, we want to avoid alcohol. Alcohol is a mold toxin. A lot of people don't realize this. When you take sugar plus brewer's yeast, you get alcohol. What is that? So the yeast eats the sugar and, for all intents and purposes, pisses out alcohol, which is a type of mycotoxin. And with all the information about mold coming out and the science on mold and mycotoxin poisoning, you don't want to do anything that adds fuel to the fire, especially if you suspect you're in a moldy environment where you're maybe being exposed. But alcohol is a mycotoxin. It suppresses the immune system. It robs your body of B vitamins and minerals like magnesium. Alcohol is an empty calorie, so it provides a source of calories with a lack of nutrients, which again drives the nutrition down. And alcohol is basically it's a drug that suppresses functionality. So we want to try to avoid it this 30 days. Every single one of you watching this has the ability to go 30 days alcohol-free. Now, let's talk about a few, what I like to call pitfalls. When you're going through the No Grain, No Pain Challenge, one of the biggest conundrums people face is this one right here, is yeast. Now, I just mentioned that yeast eats sugar and produces alcohol as a byproduct. What I'm referring to here is the yeast overgrowth in your gut can take your carbohydrates that you eat from your diet and turn your carbs into alcohol. There's actually a name, and this is in the medical literature, for yeast overgrowth of the gut. Many people develop something called autobrewery. Your gut becomes a wine factory that keeps you drunk. I had somebody in my office a couple weeks ago stumbling, and they had jaundice, their eyes were yellow, their skin was yellow, because they had autobrewery syndrome. Yeast living in your gut, aside from creating alcohol and autobrewery, yeast can mimic gluten. There's a protein produced specifically by Candida species of yeast. It's called an HWP1 protein. Hyphal wall protein 1 looks like gluten to your immune system. That's why we get a molecular mimicry reaction that can occur. So if so the reason I bring this up is this is one of the biggest drawbacks that when people are going on the no grain, no pain diet and they're kind of struggling, maybe they're not doing as well as they want to, a lot of times it's this right here. They have a yeast overgrowth, their doctor didn't measure it, and they won't and their doctor's not being observant or astute or investigative, but in reality they have a yeast overgrowth in their intestines. Now let me show you how that happens as well. So if your diet's high in sugar, you feed yeast. Sugar feeds yeast. Everybody has some small amount of yeast in the GI tract. We don't want zero yeast in the gut. There's a name for the yeast in the gut. It's called a mycobiome. And it's natural and it's normal. But what happens if you overfeed the microbiome, you get a yeast overgrowth. And now, if you take antibiotics, so this is another kind of conundrum, this happens so frequently, so many people are on antibiotics. I see this a lot. People come to me and they've been told they have Lyme disease and they've been on antibiotics for 2 years. You know, in my opinion, from an overzealous doctor who's just, you know, hammer the Lyme at all costs, not considering this as a consequence. So, and then there are other people that just go to the doctor and get antibiotics just in case. If you got the sniffles, oh, well, why don't you take the antibiotic? Or if you have a viral infection, why don't you take the antibiotic? And doctors don't have the diligence. A lot of times they won't run the test. They don't do what's called a culture and sensitivity test, which is how you identify bacterial infection and how to kill it. And if your doctor's not doing this, if they're not culturing and sensitivity testing you for a bacterial problem and they're just prescribing the antibiotic, you know, this is the potential consequence. You overgrow yeast. Antibiotics cause yeast overgrowth. It's one of the hallmark symptoms. It's been known since the introduction of antibiotics. Remember, what is an antibiotic? An antibiotic is anti-life, right? So what is it doing? It's killing bacteria. Where do most antibiotics come from? They come from mold. Antibiotics are actually a form of mycotoxin. And so the mold toxin is destroying the bacteria so that the mold that lives in the gut grows even stronger. That's the purpose of mycotoxins. That's why they work so well against bacteria. So if you've abused antibiotics or your doctor's abused you with antibiotics, this is probably happening. You might consider asking for a test to measure yeast overgrowth in your microbiome in your GI tract, because if you've got one and you're on the no grain, no pain diet, if you don't wipe this overgrowth out, you might not have as good of a result. And so that's just a pitfall that a lot of people fall into. I make you aware of it because I want you to succeed. So if you've already been following no grain, no pain and you've struggled, consider this as another potential possibility that you haven't addressed yet. So watch out for that pitfall. Make sure if you suspect it that you do some things that either with your doctor or you can do some natural things to support microbial health balance in the gut. One of the things that you can do is caprylic acid. Works really, really well to help control overgrowth yeast populations. Thyme, oil, oregano, these have antifungal properties, anti-yeast properties. So consider those things. Talk to your doctor about it if you suspect this as well. I want to share another story with you. I have just a whole litany of fantastic no grain, no pain success stories, but Rachel comes to mind. Rachel came to see me years ago. She was a pilot and she was losing her license because of her illness. It was progressively neurologically dominating her life, and you know, for her, no grain, no pain had such an impact. I want to share her story with you. We'll break away and you can check this out.
Before my health took a nosedive, I was an airline pilot. I had pretty good health. I had battled with cancer once before in 1995, but it's been in remission, hadn't had any recurrences or anything. My health was relatively decent. I knew that I had some sort of food allergy, but I couldn't really put my finger on it. I had been to several doctors and no one had really agreed with what I thought it was. I kept a food journal, and I noticed that when I ate certain foods that it would make me feel really ill, stomach ache and diarrhea. It seems like the more I got exposed to it, the worse I got, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. I was in New York on an overnight, and I just decided, I've got to have some Indian food, so I know I'll pay for this, but I know the symptoms won't be too bad. I responded to that meal very drastically. I had a lot of discomfort. I was, doubled over in pain. I felt like I was cramping, like I was having a baby again, and I was just doubled over, just crying and like, oh my gosh, I'm about to die here. I thought I had food poisoning. Well, I got over that. Very next morning, I had numbness and tingling in my feet, and I was at work. I was supposed to fly, and this tingling sensation was at my toes. I'm like, this isn't right. It feels like my toes are numb, like I've been sitting on my leg for a couple hours. I got on a standby flight that evening and got an appointment the next day at my neurologist. He's like, okay, we've got to start medicine right away. I'm like, what's going on? Well, I had ascending paralysis. I was starting to slowly lose everything from the toes up. And we were trying to get it arrested, but we had no idea what was causing it. I thought that the food that I'd eaten the evening before had triggered it, but he didn't agree. I wound up fainting in a different doctor's office, and I was in there because I had found a lump in my breast, and then come to find out, and it turned out it was breast cancer. November of 2011 is when I started having the ascending paralysis. By February of 2012, I was on a ventilator for 3 weeks in ICU. Then had a bilateral mastectomy then, and as soon as I got the cancer out, then I started improving, but very slowly, and it seemed like I was taking 2 steps forward, 1, 2, or 3 steps back, and it just could not seem to get out of the drain that I was in. I wound up having what looked like seizures, neurologic disturbances, and just could not figure out what it was. And they said, oh, I'm sorry, we've gone through all the cancer treatments, you've done a year's worth of chemo, this is all we can do for you. I wasn't going to be around in 6 months to a year if we didn't figure something out. I knew that the answer was out there, we just had to find it. And to find someone that believed me, that I knew that there was a connection between all my food allergies and my gluten sensitivity, and how within 12 hours it triggered the ascending paralysis that eventually led to the breast cancer. And I searched and found Dr. Osborne on the website. I made an appointment and got in, and it was just, we just started from scratch. Dr. Osborne has just pointed me in the right direction nutritionally and figured out all of my food allergies and my sensitivities, and then I was very nutritionally deficient because of the 2 cycles of chemo I'd been through, so I had multiple deficiencies, and especially in vitamin D and B12. And once I started getting my system taken care of, my body started healing, and it's just incredible. I mean, now I'm back in dance class, and I went from a wheelchair and on a ventilator to being able to dance again and drive myself to school and to my husband's work, and I couldn't do that before. Within 3 months, my shaking spells, or my myoclonus, had gone from several times a day to once here and there type thing. Now that we're a little over a year into it, my myoclonic events are, my last major one was Thanksgiving. And so we're talking, instead of a couple a day, we're talking weeks to months in between. By fixing the foundation and then really fixing what goes in my body, then my body can heal itself and function the way it's supposed to. I'm just so grateful to have found this place.
Again, super powerful. Many of you probably resonate with what happened with Rachel, and I hope so, because by sharing that story, hopefully many of you are getting hope, right? That your situation is not dire, and that there's definitely things that can be done and that you can do to improve. Okay, let's move forward and talk about some other pitfalls people face in the No Grain, No Pain Challenge. One of the biggest ones is exposure to meat glue. You may be asking, what in the heck is meat glue? there's a type of bacteria that's used in the food industry, and they use this bacteria to produce basically a pinkish slime that has very adhesive properties. It sticks things together, hence the term meat glue. And then they take bits of meat and they use this pink slime and they glue these bits of meat together to get processed meats. And so where you'll get exposure to meat glue, most chain restaurants, so if you think you're ordering a chicken breast and it actually kind of has a hot doggy kind of taste, that's because you're being exposed to meat glue and other chemicals. Meat glue is found in chicken breasts. It can be found in fake steaks and hot dogs. It can be found in imitation crab meats. Meat glue can also, though, be found in dairy products and confections. We'll see it in ice creams. We'll see it in as a thickening agent for other products. So you've got to watch out for this. This is why I said earlier, this is one they don't have to put on the food label. And so if you're buying meat at a restaurant, you know, this is one of the reasons I very rarely eat out, because restaurants have gone cheap, especially after the pandemic. They're trying to save money because a lot of them almost went out of business, and so they're cutting corners in quality. Not all of them, but just be wary. I always say, if you're going to eat out, eat where there's a chef. Likely that the food quality is going to be greater versus eating where there's a cook, where the likelihood that the food is going to be a lot more processed and probably is going to be delivered by a Cisco truck. Pesticides are another big one. This is why I emphasized earlier organic, because pesticides act as antibiotics on the GI tract. And remember what I just showed you about yeast. When you are being exposed to things that have antibiotic properties, you're allowing the yeast to overgrow in the GI tract and continue to wreak mimicry, gluten-like mimicry. And so keep that in mind. This is why we strive for that organic. Eating out at restaurants, I mean, this ties in because it's very hard to eat out and stay organic unless the restaurant is 100% organic and it's serving. Same thing with meat glue. A lot of restaurants use meats that contain meat glue or use other processed foods that are loaded with meat glue. So eating out becomes a challenge if you're trying to really regain your health, because you can't, I mean, again, unless the restaurant is tremendously transparent about the quality of their food, it's hard to get transparency about a lot of these things. So eating out, like I said, eat where there's a chef. If you're gonna eat out, not where there's a cook, and do it rarely. It's cheaper to eat at home. A lot of you talk about the cost of the diet and the cost of going gluten and grain free. Well, if that's something you're concerned with, it's cheaper to eat at home than it is to eat out. Even if the food that's organic, you can buy the most expensive organic and high quality food and eat at home cheaper than you can really, in most cases, eat at McDonald's. We've actually tested that out and proven it. And then processed foods is the other area where people fudge on the diet. They'll say, oh, just this one time won't hurt. And they're doing processed foods. They're going down, the gluten-free food aisle and buying different types of processed foods. Where we really see this a lot is in a lot of the packaged crackers and chips. And there are some good companies that make chips out of things like cassava and tapioca and crackers out of the same. But problem with a lot of these companies is when you make chips, it doesn't matter that they're grain-free. The question that you should be asking is, are they healthy? Are they nutritious? Are they loaded with vitamins and minerals that are going to add to my nutritional bank account, or are they mostly empty calories that are going to take away from my nutritional status? And so if you're using a lot of processed foods, even being grain-free processed foods during this process, you're going to delay your results and impair your recovery. And this is, again, especially true because a lot of these are super carb heavy. And so what do we say? We keep coming back to yeast. When you eat heavy carbs, when you eat processed foods, you take in foods that are not organic, that have the potential antibiotic activity. Not only are you killing the bacteria that naturally live in your gut, but you're feeding the yeast that also live there, and you're allowing them to grow out of control and create an environment of persistent inflammation. Okay, let's talk about nutrition support. There's a lot of vitamins and supplements that people take, a lot that you could take. What I encourage people during the No Grain, No Pain Challenge, don't focus on 25 bottles of stuff. Really focus your efforts in on just a few key core things. And so in my experience, working with thousands and thousands of people over the years, these four, let's change my color here, are probably biggest bang for your buck if you're really trying to isolate and identify which are going to have the biggest impact. So number one, it's a good quality multivitamin. I like Ultra Nutrients for several reasons. The quality of the ingredients, bar none, are extremely high. But number two, it's tolerated very well. A lot of multivitamin formulas, they try to put too much of the B vitamins in them. Many people have problems with too many B vitamins, can drive anxiety and trouble sleeping, but also tolerating them from a nausea perspective. A lot of multivitamins create nausea. Now, a lot of your lesser quality multivitamins just have fillers in them that you shouldn't get exposed to, the rice-based fillers and other things. So you want a high quality. Even if you're not using my product, find one that you trust, that's absolutely grain-free, that's non-GMO, that has clean ingredients, but also it has effective ingredients. You know, not all B vitamins are the same, not all chelates of minerals are the same. So all those things matter when it comes to absorption. Next one is a good probiotic. Biotic Defense, this is one of my versions of probiotics, but a good solid probiotic. And the reason why is many people who are gluten sensitive going away from grain, research has shown that they are depleted in specific species of Bifidobacter and Lactobacillus. And so what we're trying to do here is really help to support the population of healthy microbiome. And by doing so, we also reduce the risk of yeast overgrowth. That's what we're after. We want that balance. We don't want yeast being out of balance in the gut. Probiotics can be very effective in that way. Next one is Gluten Shield. Gluten Shield is a digestive enzyme preparation that helps to protect from cross-contamination. Maybe you're new to this diet and you're making a few mistakes. Most people that are new to it, there's a 12-week learning curve where there are the potential for mistakes. As you do it longer, you develop more and more of a mastery. But in that beginning phase, a lot of times that cross-contamination of gluten can be problematic, and we recommend Gluten Shield for that layer of protection. Now, what you don't want to do with this is don't take it so that you can try to eat pizza in a sandwich. It's not designed for you to eat gluten. It's designed to protect you from accidental exposure or cross-contamination exposure. But it also has a full battery of digestive enzymes in it. So it has specialized digestive enzymes that help you break down carbs, fats, and proteins. So if you're like many people with gluten issues and your gut is inflamed and is not up to speed, a digestive enzyme can tremendously help you break your food down and get to the good nutrition within your food. And then the last thing is Omega Max. What is this? It's a concentrated omega-3 fish oil that has an equal quantity of omega-3 EPA as well as DHA. Most formulations are super high DHA, which is popular right now because DHA is considered to be brain fat or brain healthy fat. But don't forget the EPA. Why? EPA regulates inflammation. It's part of its role in the body. That's why it's an essential fat. The body cannot properly regulate healthy inflammation without adequate quantities of EPA. And over 10,000 tests of measuring people's EPA, in the first go round when we test them when they haven't either been supplementing or they're eating a traditional American diet, 90% of the people I test have such low EPA, on the order of 10 times too low in their initial testing. Whereas DHA, a lot of times we'll see it coming back relatively normal, but it's that EPA that can really make the difference as it regulates the inflammation. So these four, if you're working on a limited budget or if you're just trying to say, what can I do that's going to give me the biggest bang for my dollar, it would be these four. Now, there are lots of other products out there. There are lots of other supplements that a person could use, but it's not within the scope of today's show to go through that entire litany of lists. I've had people come to see me in my practice where they'll bring me suitcases, literally suitcases, full of hundreds of different products that they're trying to take. And again, that's not necessary. I've never seen that be necessary in order to get healthy. So these 4 are the ones I would say focus on that first. You can expand later if you want to. Something else that you can consider from a nutritional support perspective is testing. And if you want to do testing, you can ask your doctor if they know anything about nutrition. Now, if you're asking your doctor who's not trained in nutrition to do nutritional testing, you're probably not going to get anywhere. Most doctors don't understand nutritional testing. They're not trained in it, so they're not probably the best person to run it. But there's a type of test called an intracellular nutrition analysis, and it measures the functionality of your cells based on whether or not they have adequate storage of nutrients. It's one of the most accurate ways to measure vitamin and mineral status comprehensively. And so it's the type of test I would encourage you to do if you're looking for more of a customized versus a generalized approach at your nutrition. And if you want to do that, we'll put a link in the show notes for you. We'll put a link to Gluten-Free Society where you can do an INA test if you don't have a good doctor that you can work with. Okay. I think it's important to throw in a warning about medications. Not to say if you're on medicine, stop it. That's between you and your doctor. Please don't take this as medical advice. But what I see happen in so many people who are on medication, when they go on no grain, no pain, sometimes what happens is the meds become too strong. I see this a lot, especially as it relates to people that come in and they're already on like a thyroid medicine, and they go on a no grain, no pain protocol, and their thyroid starts to improve, and then their medicine gets too strong, and they start experiencing symptoms. Because the medicine's too strong, now they can't sleep very well. They're kicking their legs at night. They have restless leg. They've got hot flashes. Their heart's palpitating. They have a higher level of anxiety because, again, when your own body starts to work better, the medicine can become too strong. So be aware of that. If you're taking meds, if you're under the care of a doctor, you should let them know what you're doing so that if you need a medication dose adjustment, just know that's a potential possibility. It doesn't just because you're doing this protocol doesn't guarantee your meds are going to be too strong, but I just want you to look out for that as a potential possibility, because if you don't, I had this happen one time a number of years ago. We had a woman who had severe musculoskeletal pain. She had a pre-existing diagnosis of hypothyroidism. She was seeing an endocrinologist, and she was on Synthroid. And so when we started changing her diet and we started supplementing her, and in her case, it was a gluten-free diet combined with iodine supplementation. We put her on iodine. What happened, and this was the fastest I've ever seen it happen, but within 3 days, she called me from the emergency room with heart palpitations and anxiety. Felt like her heart was going to kick out of her chest. And what had happened in her case was she was able to get off of her thyroid medicine. Her thyroid had stabilized so quickly. I'd never seen it happen that fast, but in her case it did. It's best case scenario. I mean, good news for her, but had we not known to look out for that, who knows what other kinds of medications she would have been prescribed, right? So be on the lookout for that. If you're on blood pressure medicines and your blood pressure starts to drop because you're losing weight and your inflammation levels are dropping, sometimes you get tired, you get dizzy, you lose your balance. That's what happens when blood pressure medicines become too strong. So be aware that there are potentials like that, and you want to keep an eye out for them so that you don't get into a tight spot. Okay, I want to share another story with you, another success story. This was a patient of mine years ago. His name is Greg, and he's got a really interesting story because he had a pretty severe problem. It was so bad he'd been to 60 different dermatologists, and one of the dermatologists he'd visited actually asked him to come to a dermatology conference and sit so that all the doctors at the conference could actually come and give a crack at diagnosing his situation. Of course, none of them could figure out what was wrong. In this case, he was reactive to food. We had tested him, and gluten, of course, grain was part of that component. It actually ended up saving his life. But I'm going to let him share his story with you. Again, the message of hope for those of you who are new to No Grain, No Pain and want to know how effective it can be.
I had suffered for a number of years from a serious skin condition, a skin rash that had started on my legs and eventually worked its way up over my entire body. The condition was undiagnosed by what I would call traditional medicine. I went to dermatologists, I went to allergists for testing. I took a number of what I would again call traditional medicines, steroids, over a long period of time with no relief. I saw probably 60 dermatologists, so much so that I was taken by one of the dermatologists I was seeing. I was taken to the VA hospital here in Houston for a dermatology convention. Was asked to be looked at by the people attending the convention. So I went to an exam room at the VA and sat in my underwear for half a day while dermatologists from all over the country came by and looked at me and asked if they could take pictures of it and said it was really interesting and we have no idea what it is. One doctor decided it was formaldehyde allergy, and so I was tested for an allergy to formaldehyde, which I was not allergic to. So this went on for a long time. And I finally did, although I didn't have psoriasis, I started eating a psoriasis diet, and it did provide some relief. But I relapsed back into having the very, very bad skin rash again. Then in February of 2014, I was rushed to the hospital and had perforated colon. So I had colon surgery for them to repair my colon. So it was getting worse and worse and worse. At the suggestion of a friend who was being treated by Dr. Osborne, went through extensive testing here, was diagnosed with allergies to many of the foods that I was eating, and over a period now of about 6 months, the skin condition has gone away, it's cleared up. No one that I was dealing with in dermatology or allergy was talking about anything to do with any of the foods that I was eating. It was always diagnosed as a skin condition, not as an internal condition that was showing up on my skin. And it was only Dr. Osborne who determined that it was indeed allergens that I was putting into my body that my body was allergic to. My skin was what was trying to get it out of my body, so it was coming out through my skin. It was never looked at as something that my body may be doing from the inside out rather than from the outside in. There was no way that I would ever go back to trying to live the way that I lived before, to eating the foods that I ate before, knowing that I'm allergic to them, knowing that it's a hereditary condition, that it's something that I did get from my parents, knowing that my father actually passed away from diverticulitis. But now I know what my issue is and will continue to be, and I will continue to live a gluten-free, grain-free, dairy-free life. You might not find your answers with the type of doctors that you would normally think that you should go to. Again, my skin condition, you would think dermatology. I had tremendously bad seasonal allergies. My daughter was on the drill team, and my son played soccer, and so I was always in the spring and in the fall, I was always out on the soccer fields or out at the football games watching my daughter cheer, and it was misery. I could barely see, my eyes would get so bad. I'd get the hacky cough and the whole bit. And this is the first spring that I've been through now where I have evidenced no issues at all with my allergies. We recommend Dr. Osborne to friends of ours on a regular basis. We already have people that are in here because of our recommendation. My son, who is a cardiothoracic surgeon at a major hospital, is having issues, and he's thinking of coming down and seeing Dr. Osborne. So it only makes sense.
So welcome back. I hope you found hope and enlightenment in that story. Powerful stuff, diet change. Don't ever let a doctor tell you that diet change can't change the history or that can't change the outcome of your health. It absolutely can, and it's absolutely critical that you investigate it and you make some changes. That's why we're talking about the No Grain, No Pain 30-day challenge. So here is our checklist. In summary, Number one, so you should print this out, screenshot this, print this out over the next 30 days, use it as a checklist to check off. But diet compliance, number one, we spelled out the rules in phase 1 and phase 2, the first 15 days and the last 15 days. Number 2, alcohol and drug-free. Now, prescription only. And when I say drug-free, we're trying to avoid over-the-counter medications, unless they're absolutely necessary. But we're trying to avoid them because so many of them affect the gut, affect absorption, and can have undue consequences. Now, prescription meds obviously are okay. You want to work with your doctor to navigate that area. We want daily exercise. Remember that exercise is to tolerance. We want 20 minutes of sunlight or red light, outdoor time, ideally. We want to take a high-quality multivitamin to support our nutrition going through this. We're aiming for a 9 p.m. bedtime. And the last part of the checklist is I want you, over the next month, I want you to attend my live weekly Q&As. These are free to you. It's a public service that I perform every Thursday at 12:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. And so I'm here every Thursday at that time for an hour to take your questions. So for this next month, I'm going to be taking your questions specifically about the No Grain, No Pain Challenge, helping you dial in any things that you're not sure about, any clarity that you need, make sure that you attend. Now, the last thing is this. We're giving away a free copy of No Grain, No Pain to those of you who want to pursue the No Grain, No Pain Challenge. Now, the stipulation here is if you go to Gluten Free Society and you use our products, for any of you over the course of this next month that want to use our nutritional support products, any order $100 or more, will get free shipping and also a free copy of No Grain, No Pain. And you'll want to use promo code No Grain, and that will hook you up. So again, you can use other products. It's not a requirement, but if you want to support our mission and what we do and help us save 100 million lives, and at the same time get a free copy of a book and some discount on products that you won't find superior quality anywhere else, I welcome you to do that. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Dr. Osborne Zone. I hope your 2025 is the healthiest year on record yet. We'll see you Thursday for that live Q&A. Take care. Thanks for tuning in to the Dr. Osborne Zone. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe for more content like this, and make sure you come back next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time and Thursday at noon 30 for more episodes.